Hi guys, welcome back. We are going to dive into the final part of that triangle today, behaviors. If you have not watched the previous videos on cognitive behavioral therapy regarding intro to CBT, thoughts and emotions, feel free and go back and watch those. This will make more sense if you watch those. However, this can be used just as a freestanding piece of information as well. If you're new here, hello, we're glad to have you. Again, hopefully you go back and watch those videos. But again, this is okay as a freestanding piece of information. So today we're just going to dive into behavior, not thoughts, not emotions, just behavior. Okay, so before we dive in, what is behavior? Behavior is simply just the actions we take. That's simple. I don't want you to get confused by the behavior model that we use today. I want you to know there is so much more about behavior out there, but we're only going to focus on the PAC model today. Okay, so if you're even another therapist watching this and you're like, but there are so many other things that we could use behaviorally in this triangle than the PAC model. I totally understand it. I just find that this model works well with people. If you're a therapist, you know, typically when people come to see us, they are already in kind of a lot of distress, and throwing them a big piece of like behavioral analysis or things like that can be a lot. So this is the model I use. I understand there's so much more about behavior than just this. If you're a therapist and you do some behavior work, I would love to connect with you and kind of see what some of your ideas are, some of the things that you like and don't like about this model. If you use this model, if you've never seen it before, I would love to connect with you. If you are even someone watching this and have been through therapy and have never heard about this, but you've done a lot of behavior work, et cetera, I would love to connect and see how you guys feel about this model. Okay, so behavior is just simply actions that we take, typically influenced by thoughts and emotions and situations, of course. Okay, so I use the PAC model to explain behavior. This is a model that came about by Dr. Eric Berne back in the 1950s, 60s, and it came from a branch known as transactional analysis. I'm not going to dive into what that is. That's a whole lesson for another day. If you want more information on transactional analysis, I'm happy to connect you to some resources, but that's essentially where this came from. Okay, so PAC. P stands for parent, A stands for adult, C stands for child. In the next slide, we're going to break down parent and child, and we're going to save adult for last. You will see why. But you can kind of see in the depiction that it's got PAC and it's kind of an arrow that seems to be never ending. And the reason that I depicted it that way and I created it that way is because, right, behavior ultimately is never ending until we die, ultimately. Right? From the time we're born, from the time we die, behavior is happening in our lives. Even if it's something where we are just laying in bed, that is a behavior. So I did it to kind of show that at any point in time, you can either be in one of these, two of these, you can be in one or two different behavioral egos, and your behavior lasts ultimately until death. So that's kind of why it's depicted that way. If you look at another worksheet that I use, it's kind of depicted like the triangle, and it's got PAC, but there's a bunch of arrows pointing towards it because it's essentially you can't get through life without going through all three of these multiple times. So that's kind of why it's depicted the way that it is. Okay, we're going to move on to parent and child. Again, like I said, we're going to save adult for last. You will see why. So parent and child behavioral egos. Before we even get into what the breakoffs are, because they do branch off into two egos. So you have 5 egos total. Okay, you have 2 parent, 2 child, 1 adult. Okay, so the adult is a freestanding ego that we'll do next. So technically you have 5 different ways that you can behave. Again, yes, I know there's more to behavior, but this is what we're using for the triangle. So your parent ego, before we get into it, all it is learned behavior. It is that simple. Do not overcomplicate it. It can be learned behavior from peers, learned behavior from mom and or dad, learned behavior from siblings. That's all it is, learned behavior. Okay, so you see this little depiction of the Grinch, and it's because that movie, I use in individual therapy, I use a lot of examples from that movie because that movie depicts emotional or behavioral ego so well in so many different aspects. So we're going to use some examples from the Grinch. That's kind of why you see that picture there. So parent ego, learned behavior. We're going to break it off into 2 egos now. It is known that you have a critical parent and or a nurturing parent at some point or another. But your critical parent is exactly what it says. It's essentially critical behavior that was learned, if we were to put it in short terms. So it is that this ego is the behavior of being critical of ourselves and or others. So if you can look back on your childhood, if you're an adult, you can look back and say, you know what, my dad was really critical. And you can give an example of why they were critical. And you're like, oh my gosh, I do that same thing. That's an indication that that was a learned behavior that you now just dip into that ego at times. Same with the nurturing, right? I will actually ask people in therapy, out of mom and or dad, who was more nurturing and who was more critical? And it's not always mom and or dad. Sometimes it's mom, dad, dad. Sometimes there is no mom and or dad. So really just try to keep it in mind with your household, but I am going to use mom and dad for right now. Most of the time people say, well, mom was more nurturing and dad was more critical. And I will say, well, how was mom nurturing? And a lot of the answers I get are, well, she always knew how to be there for me. And so I will then ask the question, okay, so how are you there for people in your life now? And a lot of the responses are, well, I always know when something's up with my friends, or I know how to be there for so-and-so. And then I kind of wait for them to let it click that that was a learned behavior. Mom essentially just taught you how to be nurturing. It's not that she sat you down and gave you a textbook on how to nurture, but you learned that behavior. Same if you're critical. If you can look back and be like, oh, you know what? My mom used to make fun of people, and now I realize that I make fun of people. Learned behavior, and it's a critical parent ego. Okay, so those are your parent egos. They're pretty self-explanatory. Again, if you want more information about it, feel free to email me. We will get you through it as best we can. So I'm not going to do the examples from the Grinch until we get through the child ego, so you can kind of see how they all tie together. So now you have your child ego, again, broken into two different parts, just like the parent. So you have an adaptive child and or a free child. And all the child ego is kind of exactly what it says. It's when you revert back to being a child, even if you're an adult. So it's kind of when you think, feel, and behave like a child would. And the example that I always use in individual therapy is, think of it as the 5-year-old that wants the Happy Meal on the way home, and mom says, no, I'm going home and I'm making spaghetti. And they don't want that. They want the Happy Meal, and they will throw a fit because they want that Happy Meal. That is kind of what a childlike behavioral ego looks like. So it's just acting like a child. Okay. I really try hard in therapy to get people not overcomplicate things. And sometimes I think that's what's lacking in the field as a whole, is therapists will try to overcomplicate things. So please don't overcomplicate things. If I overcomplicate something for you, feel free to reach out and I will try to simplify it as best as I can. Okay, so we're going to break these up. Adaptive child, free child. Your adaptive child is the behavior part of you when there is resistance and deeper hostility present. Okay, so again, the kid that wants the Happy Meal, they've got deeper hostility because they don't want your spaghetti. They got resentment because you didn't get them their Happy Meal. Okay, there's pushback. So we as adults can also have pushback. However, we're not sitting in the back of a seat throwing a fit over a Happy Meal. I mean, at least I would hope not. Instead, when we revert back as adults into that adaptive child, I have put on the screen some of the language that tends to come out. Things like, I don't care, I don't know, I want, I need. Okay, so it becomes very childlike way of speaking. So I'll give you some examples of that when we kind of put it all together. But that's very simple language that you understand. If you know this, you know that the child is present if somebody responds in those terms. Okay, so the free child, it's kind of exactly what it says too. It is the part of you that nothing else matters. You essentially become quote unquote free. Okay, so for example, I have gone to Disneyland the last 2 years in a row at Halloween time. I have no problem telling you my age right now. I'm 35. So at the time I was 33 and 34. And I can tell you right now, I did not act 33 and 34 when I was at Disneyland. I had on the ears. I had on the shirt. I had all the treats. I mean, on and on and on, right? I was not my age. Nothing else mattered. I was there with my family. We were happy and healthy. Everything was just great. We were all kind of in that free child ego. So that's kind of example of your free child. So let's kind of go to the Grinch and look at some of those examples so you can better see it. And then I'm also going to give you some examples when we get into the adult ego of how these can kind of creep in a little bit. So in The Grinch, this movie provides so many examples of behavioral egos. I always challenge my clients after this lesson to watch this movie. Some people come in and they're like, I've seen that movie a million times. I got it. It's fine. And then when we dive into it, they're like, oh, I don't remember that part. So please go watch this movie. It never fails. I also have seen this movie a ton, especially with this activity. I really try to watch this movie quite frequently, even when it's not Christmas time. And every single time I will find a new piece of the behavioral egos every time I watch it. So there are so many. If you find one and you're like, I don't know if this would be one, email me. I would love to see what you come up with. I have probably 3 or 4 pages of different behavioral egos throughout that movie. I'm always looking for more. So if you find one and you're questioning, reach out. I would love to see what you find in that movie. Okay, so to get started with the learned behavior, the parent ego. If you remember in the movie, the Grinch, as a little kid, goes to school and he's so excited, right? It's Christmas time. They're making presents for people. He's going to go home and he's going to make this little angel out of all the jewels for Martha May. And he's super excited. But before he goes home and starts making that project, he's made fun of in class, right? They laugh at him. The one that becomes the mayor essentially is the one that really starts making fun of him, and the rest of the class kind of follows suit, right? And he essentially makes fun of him in the way that he thinks he's too hairy. So the Grinch goes home, and after he's made his present for Martha May, he attempts to shave with a razor. And what happens is he goes to school the next day, and he's really embarrassed. So he's trying to hide his face. And eventually the teacher kind of pulls back all the layers, and then they see his face, and they see that he's got all these little shave marks. And so they make fun of him again. They just start criticizing him. Okay. They tell him he did a hideous job. And so what happens is he kind of gets mad and he marches up the mountain and he says, I hate Christmas. And then as he gets to the mountain, it kind of shows you at him as an adult, and he's on top of the mountain. A lot of people remember this part of the movie where he goes, hate, 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 double hate. Okay. And he now becomes critical of the who's. It was a learned behavior. They criticized him, so he criticized them. It was just a learned behavior. But someone comes along and nurtures him. Any guesses? Yes, if you said Cindy Lou Who, you're right. Cindy Lou Who comes along and nurtures him. What happens at the end of the movie? The Grinch nurtures all of them, right? He brings back the presents. He apologizes. His heart grows 2 sizes. He grows a care for Cindy Lou Who. He goes to their dinner because Cindy Lou Who nurtured him. Learned behavior. Okay, now we're going to go to the child ego. One of my favorite parts of the movie that shows this is there's a part of the movie where Cindy Lou Who invites him to the Whobilation. And he's like, what will I wear? And there's a part of the movie where he's trying on different outfits and he's in the mirror and he's doing his thing and he's like, ooh, ah, ee. Okay, that's pre-child. Nothing else mattered. He's doing his thing. He's having a good time. But a split second later, if you remember, he says, that's it, I'm not going. So that fast, he went from pre-child to adaptive child. I'm not going. Okay. And I do it like that. A lot of people in individual therapy laugh when I do adaptive child, when I'm like, but I do that because that's kind of what the brain does in a roundabout way when people fall into that adaptive child. The brain doesn't like that. Okay. So think of it when you fall into that as, I don't want to go. I don't want to do it. Okay. You can hear the simple language coming out, knowing that the child is present. Those are just 2 very small examples from the movie, but there are so many more. Okay. If you watch that movie, like I said, if you think of one or you see one, feel free to email me. I would love to add it to my list if I don't already have it. And it's just a really great depiction of how these kind of work. Okay, so I hope you have a good grasp on that, because we're going to move on to the adult ego. This is a freestanding ego. This is not branched off into other parts. It's freestanding, and it's the ego you want to strive to be in. Okay, this ego is focused on the evidence, quote unquote, Mr. Murder Man. This is why you always do Mr. Murder Man, first to kind of get the brain used to using and learning about the evidence. People are focused on solving the problem, quote unquote, using the evidence in this ego. So adult ego is solving the problem. That is it. Again, do not overcomplicate it. It's just solving the problem using the evidence at hand. And you can see the language on the screen has now shifted a little bit. So instead of I want, I need, I don't know, I don't care, the language becomes I realize, I believe, I see, I understand. The language becomes a little bit different. People will ask, what is the big deal with this? This sounds so formal, Ashley. People don't talk like this. And I always laugh and I say, yeah, that's why I have a job. Okay. And people think that's quite funny, but it is so true. Words matter. And I will give you an example that I see that seems so silly, but I see it all the time. I see it in friend groups and I see it at home. So I'm going to use the home first. If we are a family unit and I don't know, we'll just say mom says, hey, what do you guys want for dinner? And the kids speak up and say, I don't know. Okay, I don't know. The mom is like, what does that mean? What do you mean you don't care? You don't know? Like, what do you guys want? Without understanding that the problem at hand is dinner. That is the problem trying to be solved. I don't care if it seems silly and it is super small. It is still a problem that needs to be solved. Okay. So solve the problem. And some people say, but what if you truly don't know what you want for dinner or you truly don't care? That's fine. It's all in how you say it. Again, words matter. So instead of, I don't know what I want for dinner, and then it just puts the other person on the defense because it's like, what the hell does that mean? Or I don't care. Try to use adult-like language, adult ego-like language, right? So for example, instead of, I don't know what I want, I realize I haven't given much thought today as to what I want for dinner. What are you thinking? And I already know people tell me all the time, that's too formal. I don't talk like that. Again, that is why I have a job. Words matter. You don't have to take this advice at all. You do not have to change the way you talk, but you're not necessarily going to get as far as you could if you don't. Okay. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm just here to give you the information. Okay. Again, I see this in friend groups a lot. Oh yeah, the weekend comes around, we're going to go out to eat. And there's always one friend that seems to be the planner to get everybody together. And it's, where do you guys want to go eat? And people are like, I don't know. I don't care. And the other person is like, oh my gosh, will somebody just pick a freaking place to go eat? Again, if you don't know or you don't care, it's okay. But try to solve the problem, right? Again, I realize I genuinely don't care where we go. I'm just looking forward to hanging out. So if nobody else has any ideas, I will throw a couple out there, but I'm down to see what everybody else is thinking. It's that simple. It's literally that simple. Solve the problem. That's it. I see it all the time. Solve the problem. It's not hard. Use your language. Solve the problem. Okay. So there's a couple of key points that I want to give you that I get asked about in individual therapy. And one of them is about the nurturing parent ego. Some people will ask, what is the problem? If we strive to be in the adult ego, then why is it a problem to be in the nurturing ego? And I tell people it's not necessarily a problem unless there is a problem. So for example, if your friend I don't know, their boyfriend just broke up with them, and you're like, I need to be there for my friend. I need to go nurture them. Great. That's the perfect time to be in the nurturing parent ego. There's not necessarily a problem to solve. They've broken up. They're just kind of going through that grief. They just need somebody there. That's appropriate, right? It's not every time. There's not always a problem to solve. Sometimes we just have to sit in it. And that's when nurturing ego becomes okay. However, one of the examples I always use of when it becomes a problem is, let's say a little kid falls off their bike and they kind of scrape up their knee. They get some dirt and some rocks and some grime in that knee and they're bleeding. And you as a parent, you run over and you immediately kind of start to nurture and hug and love on that child, make sure they're okay and they're feeling safe. Okay, that's great. But now what if you put them back on their bike and you send them on their way? What problem did you not solve? If you said the knee, you're correct. If you do not solve that problem of getting the rocks and the dirt and the grime out, that knee could turn into something much, much worse. Okay. So it's not that the nurturing parent is quote unquote bad. You just want to make sure when you're in it for the correct reasons. Okay. Correct reasons. If there is a true problem at hand, nurturing someone before you solve that problem is great. But if there's a problem, please nurture and then solve the problem. If there's not a problem, go ahead and just nurture. That is okay. I genuinely cannot think of a time where critical parent ego is healthy to be in. The only time I can think that that would necessarily be healthy is if you are with a safe person and you're like, I just need to vent. I just need to let it out. And you're using all the errors in the world and you're just lashing out and getting it out. I think that would be appropriate just to kind of get some of the heat off. But other than that, I can't think of a time that critical parent would necessarily be quote unquote appropriate. Again, if you're a therapist and you have more insight on when you feel like critical ego would be appropriate, I would love to hear. If you're watching this and you're like, oh, but this has happened to me, I wonder if critical parent was okay to be in that time. Again, email me. I would love to hear your thoughts. I personally cannot think of a time where that would quote unquote be appropriate versus the one that instead of just the one that I just gave you. That's the only time I can think of it. Your adaptive child, I don't necessarily think, again, this is one that's appropriate to be in at any time, because if you have behavior that's rooted in hostility and resentment and pushback, I don't know how that can be healthy. Again, maybe if you're with a safe person and you're just like, I just don't want to, I want this, I need this. And maybe then, other than that, I can't think of a time. So you really just want to focus on that adult ego, solving the problem. What is the problem? Use your evidence, right? So in Mr. Murder Man, if you use the who, what, when, where, why, how, you can go back and use all that evidence. So when was it 8 p.m.? What was a murder? How was a stabbing? Who, Jane and Bob, like on and on and on. You can use the evidence to kind of gather up the facts to solve the problem. And in Mr. Murder Man, we did. The problem at hand was, do you let him walk free or do you send him to jail? That was the whole point of the activity. I read the story, you send him to jail, you let him walk free. Which one are you going to do? That's solving the problem. And as we gathered more evidence, you decided to put him in jail. Okay, same thing here. Change your language a little bit. Words matter. The way you say things really do matter. So try to get in the habit of, I realize, I believe, I understand, I see. Again, if you're looking for more ways to have adult ego-like language, email me. I'm more than happy to send you a list of words that could possibly be used instead of the childlike ego words. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this. The next video is going to be a review and kind of putting all three parts of the triangle together. Okay, after that, that's all of cognitive behavioral therapy. You did it. You did all of cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the last video. The next video is just going to be a review and kind of what you have after this, and then putting all of the pieces together just to kind of show you how it flows. And then we're going to move on to some dialectical behavioral therapy. So I hope you are enjoying so far. As always, questions, comments, concerns, feel free to email me at utlcsw@gmail.com. For all of you that have watched, thank you so much. It means a lot to me for the support. And for those of you that are kind of pushing my name out in the community, thank you. One of my ultimate goals is to be able to teach larger groups of people and to kind of get my name out there to be able to do that for like some different seminars and things like that. So all of you behind me supporting me, anybody that watches this at any time, truly thank you so much. Please let me know how I can be of assistance. Okay, hope you guys enjoy. See you guys later.